Okay, I would say we can start. I'm Mira, and I will moderate this workshop with our expert Nhlanhla Mabizela about how to tackle gender-based violence at Lesotho's garment factories today. A small reminder to keep your cameras on during the workshop. If you don't wish to be recorded, you can switch off the camera. The recorded video of the workshop will be uploaded afterwards at Diversity under the unit and on YouTube, so you can check and share it later. Also, please turn off your microphones when other people are speaking. So welcome everybody to our workshop on Lesotho's garment factories tackling gender-based violence with our expert Mabizela. Thanks for being here. Mabizela is a field program specialist for the African region at the Solidarity Center in Lesotho in Southern Africa. He will answer your questions today at this workshop, which is planned for about 1 hour as usual. As in other workshops from the Global Labour University, this is as well an interactive workshop, so please share your questions in the chat below or by raising your hand. And please put down your hand when your question has been answered. So as usual, to start the conversation, I would give the first question. After that, all of you can start asking questions or giving comments, in the chat or by raising the hand. So thank you again for being here and taking your time. The first question would be, in your video lecture, you point to research from the Worker Rights Consortium, which provided solid evidence of rampant gender-based violence and harassment in Lesotho garment factories. Why did unions in Lesotho not pick up this topic before? How important was research at the work of women civil society organizations in pushing unions to engage with the topic?
Okay, thank you for inviting me, and I hope the comrades here who are participating, they're enjoying the course. As Mira said, my name is Nhlanhla Mabizela from the Solidarity Center, and based in Lesotho, working with the Lesotho garment factories. As far as the question is concerned, is that, as we know, I think it's not even unique to Lesotho. Basically, the issue of dealing with issues of gender-based violence and harassment, but particularly in terms of gender mainstreaming in general with trade unions. So it's not likely a surprise that the trade unions in Lesotho didn't pick this up in the first place, because their primary concern then was to make sure that issues of better wage, living wage, and they negated the fact that, the garment industry on its own is predominantly women. So they were just focusing on making sure that the core trade union issues are addressed, let alone, I think in terms of gender and gender integration, it wasn't something that was focused on. And I think topping that as well is that Lesotho on its own is a very conservative country. And it's women are not really regarded as being people who are more, they're regarded as caregivers, basically. The working industry or the industry itself has been focused, or union organizing has been focused on being predominantly male-dominated. So issues of gender-based violence and harassment were not the issues that they were looking at. And even with the research itself, if you go back to the research itself, it focused on worker violation. So when they were doing WRC, when WRC was doing that, it was then, part of the respondents responded on the issue of gender-based violence and harassment, and especially sexual harassment within the factory. That's when they picked it up. Otherwise, they were just generally, looking at worker violations within the garment factories in Lesotho. So I think generally, I mean, that's not the issue that they focus on. And the women's organizations, of course, I mean, that's the issues that they were focusing at, and particularly the two women's organizations that we've partnered with. Their work is really focused on emancipation or the liberation of women in general in Lesotho. And when they joined, it was more about them sharing their expertise so that the trade unions will be able to deal and integrate and mainstream gender issues more easily into their own programs, into their own fold. Because on their own, I think there were certain things that they were not going to be able to like really look at. And one of the things that in Lesotho were key, and I think they've been coming up, and it's not part of the research, is the issue of maternity protection. And it's something that the workers in Lesotho, and particularly the women, were saying to the trade unions they need to pay more attention to, so that I mean, like really, they are able to enjoy being at work and being women. But the trade unions were not able to likely pick that up and move with it in a way that they are doing with when they're doing wage negotiations and when they're doing with health and safety issues. But when it came to issue of maternity protection or maternity, they were not able likely to move or to take that up in a strong way. But the women's organizations are the ones that have been challenging a number of legislations in Lesotho, and one of them is a piece that they were able to win, I think, in the last year, where women are able now to inherit and buy land. Yeah. Thank you, Mira.
Thank you very much. So now the stage is yours. You can ask our comrade Mabizela questions or give some comments on your own experience. So please go ahead. Any questions? Any comments? Okay, then I would go to a question which has been made from Benjamin Velasco. He's not here, as I can see, but I would ask, he sent us the question before, and he's from the Philippines and very active here as well. And he's asking, what were the enabling factors that led to the binding agreements between workers, factories, and brands? Is that clear for you to answer? Unfortunately, he's not here to clarify a little bit more.
I think I can attempt answering that question. It's that the enabling factors there were that there was a great interest in terms of the brands buying into the program, because they are the ones who are sourcing from the Lesotho factories. So that was an enabling factor, in terms of making sure that, whoever they're sourcing from, there's are treated fairly, most particularly, I mean, like if it comes to issues of gender, there's equality, so I think that was the major enabling factor in terms of, this binding agreement to be there. And also, I think the second one was the issue of freedom of association. That was also one of the things that made this agreement more flexible, because it meant that workers also have the freedom to choose as to who they will be or they will trust in terms of reporting some of the issues around gender-based violence or harassment in the workplace in particular, let alone issues of worker violation. So that made it a little bit easier, for particularly for the producer or for the manufacturer to accept and acknowledge the agreement. Yeah. So, but the major players here were the brands, because they're the ones also who helped us in the initial stages in terms of launching up this project and enabling us to have an independent entity which is not linked to any of the organizations that are there. It's just independent. It does its own findings and it's the one that makes the determinations. So it's not, it does not answer to any of the partners there, neither the brands nor the organizations, nor Solidarity Center and the Workers' Rights Consortium. So that, I think, it made it more attractive. It made it more easier to work with, because the Workers' Rights Watch is not influenced by anyone. I'm not sure if I was able to answer the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is there another question? Yes, Aisha, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mabizela. My question is, were the perpetrators of this violence against the women ever brought to justice? Were there some that were possibly persecuted before the courts of law? Thank you.
Maybe to start with, this is not a law on its own. It works within the confines of the Lesotho law, right? Yes, we do not make that judgment as a project. So we just make a determination which is binding, yes, and it's binding to the factory, in terms of making sure that the perpetrators or perpetrators of the acts of violence within the nation factories, get the end of their actions. And yes, they did. We have a number of likely determinations that were made. And I think there are some people who have been dismissed because of the way they've likely acted, after the investigations were done and the determination was offered. So people have been dismissed, yes. And of course, it even indicates that they've got the right to appeal if they feel that things haven't likely been done accordingly. But yeah, there have been judgments, determinations that have led people being dismissed in their work because of their conduct.
Thank you very much for your question, Aisha, and the answer. Any other question from you? Now's the chance to ask the expert. Yes, Adlida.
I have actually two questions. One is, why Lesotho? As you point out in your video lecture from the start, sexual harassment and violence is pervasive in garment sector across the world. What was about Lesotho that this program took off, with these landmark agreements that were signed? It's a very special program, right? We don't have yet such a binding agreement in other parts of the world of this scale. And my second question is, this program has been going now on for about 2 years, right? So what would you say is the impact in terms of reducing the incidence of gender-based violence and harassment? So are there kind of assessment reports in which kind of are demonstrating that there is an impact, because you mentioned in your video lecture, there are several interventions, right? Like training, there are these reporting lines and safe channels for workers to actually report what is happening and so on. What would you say has been the impact on the very problem? Thank you.
I'll start with the first question around why Lesotho and why this project started in Lesotho. Is that the research was done in Lesotho by Workers' Rights Consortium, excuse me, and as we all know, that organizing evolves all the time, and we're trying to really find different modules of organizing and finding justice for the workers. And this presented an opportunity for us to explore with a module that incorporates the buyer, incorporates the manufacturer, and incorporates the worker, and also the society through the civil society organization, the women's organization. So it was, given also Lesotho in terms of its size, it's not so big. It will help us in terms of really looking at that module and refining it, and exploring with that. And I think that's the answer to your why Lesotho. We are experimenting with that and wanting to, expand it as well, and to see if if it becomes a good model, in terms of bringing in a different idea in terms of how do we organize, and how do we ensure health and safe, healthier and safer workplaces, for all. So that's one. And in terms of the impact, is that, as we highlighted in the video, in the lecture, that the factories themselves, the factory in particular, it was not the first time that they were dealing with the issue. They had their own internal mechanism. And that internal mechanism, it had flaws in it, because the people were reporting to the very same managers. And before you know it, the secondary victimization, there's a number of things that really follow through in terms of reporting such cases. Intimidation, to an extent of someone even, leaving the area because of their own safety, and because of shame. Then, the program came in. It took us time before people could trust, because there was, it was not an information line, it was a hotline that was designed by the factory, right? And it was even on their pay slips, if they've got any emergencies, they will call that number. But to their surprise, they will then get exposed, but with this program, the information line is very confidential. It's not even housed within the factory. It's not even known to some of the people where it is, So it's very confidential. And as people started seeing and trusting, seeing that the information, or when they call, they don't even give their name. They don't even share who they are. They're not even asked even their ID numbers, work ID numbers. They're not even asked those. So as things progress, people begin to trust it more. And the more we do the education and awareness, activities, and telling them what's the difference between gender-based violence and gender-based violence at work, how that differs, and once they get that information and they recognize that, they call the information line, and the people in the information line are trained to assess, or to listen to the caller. And if the case is not a gender-based violence case, it's something else. Let's say it's an issue that has to do with working conditions. It then gets referred to a preferred organization. It could be one of the unions that are organizing within the factory itself, or it could be an organization of their choice, of the caller's choice, right? And if then it's a gender-based violence case, it gets referred to the Workers' Rights Watch, and even at the Workers' Rights Watch as well. The issue of confidentiality is re-emphasized, and the name is not even likely going to be published anywhere. So as workers begin to call and go through the system, they then, likely the workers will see the results in the factory. And then they started trusting the program more and more and started calling. So we are beginning to see the impact, to an extent that the information line these days is even getting calls from other factories which are in Lesotho, which are producing clothes for different countries. They are now calling the information line. They want to receive the similar kind of services, because they see the impact, they see the success, they see how this program is beginning to give back the power to the workers, in terms of reporting the issues that are very sensitive and they do not get exposed. And the fact that as well, it's not only focused on the factory itself, it's also like dealing with the third parties, the subcontractors like your security guards, because the agreement itself, it uses the language that is on the Convention 190, of ensuring that the world of work is protected, and the worker is protected from when they live and go to work, to ensure some of those things, even though it hasn't sunk to some of them, and as we know that, as more people come into the factory, and if they're looking for work, the first point of entry as well is the securities. That's who they get in contact with, and the security companies most of the time are subcontracted by the company itself. And so the agreement make it such that those people are held accountable as well as third party or as subcontractors to the main factory. Right? So that's the impact that we are beginning to see. In terms of the assessment, we are now, getting ready to assess. What we did initially was to look at the cultural impact. We did a cultural assessment to look at the patterns of gender-based violence and harassment within the Ningxin factory. As it indicated that there's been norms and traditions that have been followed for some time. So we want to see if that culture changes over time. And we are beginning to see that it's changing. Right? We are beginning to see that it's changing because people are beginning to talk more and more about it. They're beginning to be more aware of what constitutes sexual harassment, what constitutes gender-based violence, basically, within the factory setup. We are beginning to see that. Whereas before it was taken as part of the tradition, part of the custom, because it's something that happens in society, but in the workplace, it gets, elevated a little bit. So we are beginning to see a change of that. Even the language itself is beginning to change in terms of how people address each other. But in terms of a tangible and scientific study on the impact itself, we haven't done that assessment as yet. We are in the process of doing it. This is just anecdotal evidence that we are receiving, through the information line, through the Workers' Rights Watch, and also through the education and awareness, because now, we are towards the end of reaching the major number of workers there. And the word has been going around in the factory, that this program is beginning to make an impact. And when people come to the workshops, they already have an idea what the workshop is like. Even the questions are more precise. The questions are more around, how do we interact with each other as workers, whereas before it was just taken for granted, that we are all the same, in a way, and maybe following basically the binary, of male and female, yeah, that's, what I can share, Conrad, in terms of answering. I don't know whether I've done justice.
Thank you very much. I think it's very interesting what you just said. I saw the hands up from Chinelo. Please.
Yes, please. Okay, so my question is, you mentioned workers from other factories across Lesotho calling in to see if they can benefit from the program. How do you cater to such people? Does the program take care of them? How so? That's my question.
Itself, those are some of the limitations. It really caters for those specific factories within the Ningxing factory. So that's the limitation of the program. Right? However, since we've recognized that there will be other workers, we don't leave them out. We have an inventory, an inventory of organizations that could assist outside of the agreement, outside of the agreement that we have with Ningxing. And that's in the interim, because we are in a process of likely expanding the program to other factories and open it up a bit, and as you know, I guess we've mentioned that this is largely based on having negotiated with the buyers, also with the brands of other factories. So as we want to involve them within the program, we need to sit down and have negotiations with them so that they can agree to the program itself. Yeah, but in a whole, in terms of taking care of workers, we don't leave any worker out or anyone out. We make sure that we refer them to organizations that can do a proper follow-up and give justice to render justice to them as complainant. It might not be as effective, but yeah, it's really catering for their needs. I don't know whether Chinelo, I was able to answer your question, Comrade.
Yes, you have. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is there any other question? If not, we received another question from Leland Kumari. It's a little bit generalizing, or it's a very general question, but maybe we can look at it a little bit more specific. So the question is, what actions can be taken during working place when gender-based violence and sexual harassment? So like I said, it's a little bit general, but maybe you could give some, I don't know, basic guidelines which are for strategies which have been working in other cases. For example, you just mentioned that you wanted to expand a little bit the impact, and do you have any first steps or basic recommendations which have been working in other cases already we can refer to? Thank you.
From the code of conduct that we've designed together with the factories in Lesotho, with this specific one, because the code of conduct is very specific around what you need to do in terms of mitigating issues of gender-based violence and harassment. And one of the key things that were there was that there's not going to be any intimidation, and there's not going to be any loss of wages if you as I'll put it in a legal language, as a complainant, if you're going to go through the investigation, you're not going to lose your time, right? And also the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator, they're not going to lose their time. So that, on its own, it's a strategy that really raises the confidence, in terms of likely how the worker can be able to report some of these issues, some of these incidences, because, and also, I think the major part of it is that it's something that it's only between you or between the alleged victim and the investigator, that on its own, really helps a lot in terms of giving confidence in reporting the case and making sure that the case is followed through. And that is not even done in the factory. Not even the HR will be aware of who the person is. Right? Not even likely the managers are going to be aware of who the person is. Right? And in other cases, we've worked in South Africa, right? And in South Africa, one of the likely, I think, a bigger victory is when the CCMA, Commission on Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration, trained some of their commissioners specifically to deal with issues of gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace. And this was done through hard work that was done by the federations in South Africa, in ensuring that that gets incorporated. And they took advantage also of what was negotiated in Geneva in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, on the C190, and made sure that that gets incorporated. And with that, I think we're beginning to see a greater strategy, as this is over and above them helping to reconstruct the constitutions of their own trade unions to make sure that the issues of gender equality is not only in terms of tokenism, they become constitutional, they become constitutional binding agreements, they become more legal, And I think we've heard that they also are trying to get a third party, that can likely mitigate on some of these issues. So I think the strategies is being more deliberate and more focused in terms of wanting to deal with issues of gender-based violence and harassment, with issues of, and it's not only, I think, issues of gender as, in the binary when we think about it, but also being able to really look at issues of class, the whole comprehensively, the intersectionalities of dealing with issues of harassment on issues of gender. And that can only be achieved through a deliberate and a conscious effort of having a specific and a tailored curriculum that will address issues of gender-based violence and highlight, because some of these things are foreign to workers, when you talk about the concept of gender. We may take it for granted. We may take it as like it's something that is easy. In Lesotho, the other experience has been, when you speak about gender, but when you translate it into the local languages, it means something different. It has a different meaning, and if we're not careful around that, we might lose a number of people. But the more you interact and the more you get tailored to the particular context, in taking into consideration the cultural aspects and some of the nuance, issues that are there that we might not likely even get. And that can be achieved by sitting down and deliberately designing a program that will deal with issues of gender, comprehensively. And then that can then be incorporated into the broader organizing strategies. I tried to like tailor it more specifically, but yeah, and yes, it is.
You're muted.
Sorry, yeah, yeah. So I said I tried. I mean, like really to answer, and I hope I was able to answer the question and be more specific in terms of giving examples.
Yeah. Adlira, do you refer with your question to what he just said?
Yes,
okay.
You said something about this cultural, interpretations and so on. You said even it has a different meaning when you translate it in the local language. What do you mean by that?
I can be specific in terms of Lesotho. When we say gender, right? When you say gender, and they have a word that is called, I think it's called buleng, right? When it's loosely translated in their local language, it means your social standing, your social status, instead of like being specific around, the gender differences in terms of how females and males are socialized. In terms of socialization, it has a different meaning, a different interpretation. But then once you start like explaining it and unpacking it and linking it to what they understand about privilege and power, then that's when they're able to understand it, and contextualize it. And you may even find that when you do that, in terms of not only in terms of like the general spoken language in that particular country, but it also gets more complicated as you get into the different kinds of ethnic groups or cultural groups. It has a different meaning as well, in terms of how it gets interpreted. And even, like really the transition as well, we may take it for granted, when they're in the urban city or in the urban setting, like in the case of Lesotho, in Maseru, women can wear pants and can go bareheaded, but immediately when they go to their homeland, things change, things change. They then have to follow a certain kind of rule, that has been set for them. So that can be confusing for someone. Right? That can be confusing for someone, and if it's not unpacked and linked to, to the context, And that's what we've been picking up as we're doing these workshops and these trainings, that people were not aware. They were thinking that they were doing what is normal, what is okay, is acceptable in culture, that, men have a right to touch you in anyhow, and especially if it's somebody in seniority, right? Especially if somebody in seniority, and whatever they ask, you don't question. Whatever they ask, you don't question. But when you begin to unpack that, it becomes easier for them to understand, oh, I've been violated. And they will be able also to take it, to link it to where they come from in terms of how they get discriminated because of their gender, because of their sex, because of how they identify themselves. And what's beginning to likely be more and more expressed a little bit in Lesotho as well is the issue of trans. I think there's people in Lesotho who are beginning to talk more and openly about being trans, and some of them have even challenged the legislation itself. So that confused a number of people, why that happens. So these workshops are beginning to likely unpack that a little bit. That's what I meant by likely a different meaning, because it becomes more personalized to some people.
Thank you very much. Yesterday at the workshop, we heard about male gender equality champions, and I think we can call you like this because of your engagement in this.
Yeah, and there's an interesting story to that as well. And I think the Male Gender Champions program, if you haven't had, you had it from the South Africans, right? I don't know whether it was for one of the trade unions in South Africa.
No, it was from Melissa Serrano and Werner Viaja.
Okay.
Elira, was it a specific area or?
It was, they did a survey of what trade unions across the world are doing in terms of achieving gender equality. And they had many trade unions in Asia, but also global unions and other trade unions across the world. And it seems to be something going around in different countries. But the two authors are from the Philippines that actually made reference to the term.
Yeah, and the reason that I'm saying this is something that we explored in South Africa. You know, as I said, I mean, I worked a lot in South Africa. We worked with COSATU and FEDUSA mainly around that. And the concept of male gender champions, it's something that they embraced a lot, and it helped them to even, I mean, like really have male gender champions within their structures, and particularly within the leadership. That has enabled, and I think it goes back to your the other question, you know, what are some of the things that are enabling, is finding men who do not just talk the rhetoric, but it's something that they live, it's something that they practice, it's something that they believe in as well, you know. And that's what we found in South Africa, that it's not about when we ask, you know, a question around what is gender equality, you know, how do we interpret that, and how does that, you know, display itself or show itself, you know? And people would want to be praised for changing nappies or be praised for washing dishes, you know. It's not about that, you know, because that's something that, you know, people can see, but it's really about, you know, it's really about how do we begin to dismantle the patriarchal notions? How do we begin to deal with issues of power? What am I willing to give up as a man? I mean, I'm looking at, you know, the number of people that are here, you know. What's my position of privilege? If we are in a meeting, for an example, and I recognize that Comrade Chinelo has been raising her hand all along, and I raise my hand suddenly, and I get the floor, it's for me to give up that position. Say, I can give up my space for Comrade Chinelo because she wants to raise a point, and I will be able to share if there's an opportunity, you know, because that's not pressing, you know. So it's really being able to raise those things that are sitting in our subconscious to the conscious level, you know. And also, I mean, like, if nominations are happening, you know, I think we've seen that with the nursing unions in South Africa, where the elections and nominations were more on the male nurses as opposed to the female nurses. How then they begin to encourage and take that, not to own up to their position of privilege, but take that space to encourage the nomination of women within their structures. You know, so that's what, you know, the Male Gender Champion program is all about. You know, and that's how, I mean, like, I got interested when you say that I get to be called the Male Gender Champion, and it's something that we've been working at and exploring within the Southern Africa region. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. There are two great questions in the chat. I would like to ask Apelles to ask a question directly to our comrade. if you can. Please, Apelis. I hope I spell your name correctly. I'm sorry. Apelis Olvalo, are you there? Can you speak?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is, with regards to sensitization, how do they do it in Lesotho and also with incidents, for instance, in workplaces, and how can the impact of after sensitization, or how do we know that after the workers have been sensitized at workplace? How do we know that they now know what they're supposed to do or how they're supposed to report their cases at workplaces in regards with gender-based violence?
So thank you, Comrade, for your question. We have a tailored program. It's a 2-day workshop that we take workers through in terms of defining what gender is, how it differs to sex, what harassment is, and what does gender-based violence and harassment look like in the workplace? What are the root causes? How do you identify the root causes? And what's the impact of those root causes? And what do you do with that information? So the 2-day workshop, raises all of those. And once they go through, then they begin to see what is gender-based violence and where does it come from, and how does it get exacerbated, and from there they can then pick up the phone and call the information line. And in the information line as well, it's not only about them calling, it's also them receiving counseling of some sort, and from there, if the case is not necessarily a gender-based violence and a work-based gender-based violence and harassment, it's, for an example, it's an issue of domestic violence. We've got organizations that deal with that give psychosocial support. Then they get referred to those organizations. And they're not forced as well to go through that program. It's their choice. They get asked, they get consent if we can refer them to a different organization. And I think that's the answer to maybe the question that you're asking around the impact. What's the impact? How do we see that the program is having an impact? It's because there's more calls that are coming into the information line. And also, the factory that we've been working with, initially it had about 12,000 workers, but because of COVID and the shutdown and the economic situation globally, they were reduced to about 4,000 or 5,000. And we've trained almost about 3,000 of those workers. So the word also gets around, in terms of helping each other and talking to the other people. And we also engage in other programs, like the radio programs, where we talk about what is gender and what is gender-based violence and what does it look like and what constitutes that. And we also have designed booklets, and those booklets are booklets that have a lot of infographics, in terms of what is gender-based violence. And on top of that, we've got a video clip that explains that process as well in 3 different languages. So that's the sensitization, and the impact of incidences gets reported through the information line.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's a question from Shiku, sorry. She's traveling, so I'm gonna read it, and it's great. I must say that she's always very active here, and even when she's traveling, she raises a lot of questions. So thank you for that. Her question now is, in this particular garment factory, was it only women who were being sexually harassed, or was it both men and women? Yeah, that is her question.
I think that's the interesting part of dealing with issues of gender, right? That's an interesting part of like really unpacking what gender is. And as we begin to unpack it and look at like the power dynamics that are at play, you know, and how that shifts when it gets to the workplace, right? How that gets shifted when it gets to the workplace. And through this program, we were beginning to see that also men were reporting issues of being discriminated and being discriminated based on their sex and also based on their gender, right? And they get discriminated. So they were able to report those cases. They were able to report those cases, even though, I mean, like they're not as much, And also, I mean, I think you can pick up from this answer that it's not only women, but it's also, we are beginning to hear more and more about people who identify differently, lesbians and gays within the setup as well. They're able to like really pick up. And I think, as we do these programs, it makes it easier for people to have conversations because they now have the language, They now have a way of expressing and identifying issues. It's no longer like really those words that are very harsh and defamatory. People are able to identify and able to even likely assist each other in terms of how a person identifies themselves. But answering the question, yes, it's not only women. We're beginning to see men reporting such cases.
Thank you very much. Is there another question? Okay, then I would like to close the conversation with a last question. So although the landmark agreements have limited scope insofar as they cover only the factories of this particular company, your video lecture seems to indicate that their impact is going beyond as more workers are requested for help and support to fight gender-based harassment and violence. You spoke about it already, but if you can add or expand on this impact a little bit more. And are there concrete initiatives in other garment factories, but also sectors inspired by these landmark agreements? And has the conversation on gender-based harassment and violence become more mainstream in the public debate? You mentioned it already a little bit, but maybe you can summarize everything a little bit by answering this question. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, we are exploring and expanding to other sectors, and more specifically, your informal sector, to really try and like really create a program there, and to ensure that issues of gender-based violence and harassment are dealt with, and creating more safer and healthier workspaces. And as you know, the informal sector is a sector that is, predominantly women. Then we are, trying to like move into that sector. But in terms of like really public discourse and public debates, we have started to do roundtable discussions. And those roundtable discussions, we have, so far had two of those. And one was with the the CSOs in Lesotho, just to likely speak about this program, but also likely mainly speak about C190 as an enabling tool, begin to discuss some of these issues and why it needs to be ratified. And the second set of likely debate that we had was with the different departments within the government of Lesotho, because we also see them as a key player around some of these issues, and to be able to understand the impact of gender-based violence, of not addressing issues of gender-based violence, and why we need to advance, some of the issues and take them to a different level. So we've engaged on that. But what we have likely been doing throughout the program that I didn't mention is that we've been having radio programs that are more specific, because what we've recognized is that, as much as we talk about gender, people do not know that there's NGOs, especially the CSOs, the human rights organizations, particularly women's rights organizations in Lesotho, who have fought, for decades in terms of advancing issues of gender equality, but particularly issues of women's rights. And they have won certain legislations. But the majority of the people that are supposed to be benefiting from that are workers in the factories who are unable to attend some of these programs, who are unable to sit in any community workshops, because they leave very early in the morning and they come back very late at night, and they have very limited time in terms of attending to some of those issues or even reading. So we've done programs that were very deliberate, where we work with trade unions to talk with the shop stewards in the factories. And once we have a program, through the social media groups, they can likely publicize that there's going to be a talk on radio about a topic on gender or a topic on a certain piece of legislation, so that they can likely follow through and listen. And some of them, because the radios, they are allowed to use their headphones at work, they can listen to their program at work. So that is done through the trade unions, so that they can likely spread it through their social media platforms. And that's another way of likely getting and expanding the program, so, and that's how, again, likely the program got become more popular and more understood. And those are some of the channels that we're exploring, and as I mentioned, that the plan now is to expand it. And as we expand it, we want to also reach out to communities, and especially communities that are in the closer proximity to the workplaces, so that they begin to understand, what we are talking about when we're talking about issues of gender and gender-based violence. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, I hope I did a good summary of what our next steps are.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you all very much for your active participation. I'm really impressed how lively online workshops can be. And I hope you all learned a lot and now can see and provide now practical solutions for grievances such as gender-based violence at the workplace. Thank you very much for your time and your expertise, Mabizela. And yeah, that's it for this week. It's the last workshop, and but we hope to see you in other courses and other workshops.